Welcome to Sizzle Fantasy Sports, the channel with the most sizzling hot fantasy takes and analysis, presented by your host, Gavin.
Rodgers clean pocket, throws the middle to Gibson, Devontae, touchdown, and a dagger!
How's it going, and welcome back to the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I'll be talking a little bit more about some 2021 fantasy football running backs. This is the most important position in your fantasy lineups for this season in fantasy football, as it has been the trend here for the last few years now. You have to have a strength or some level of competency at the running back position in order to win your fantasy league. So it's really important that we get this position right this season. I did a video a couple days back where I talked about some must-draft players. That was based off of value and average draft position. Those are guys that I feel should be elevated higher on boards on draft day because I think that they're being slept on a bit too hard right now and have some real value to fantasy teams that could be very useful. So this has nothing to do with that. These are just guys I see as studs this season and must-haves in your lineup this year. It doesn't matter if you go out and draft these players on your league's draft day or if you go acquire them via the trade market. You just want these guys around on your fantasy team. So make sure you've clicked that subscribe button, turn the bell on, don't go anywhere, and let's get started. Alrighty, kicking things off the bat right away here. If you've been watching my mock drafts, you've probably come to the realization that maybe this name was going to be on the list here. Dalvin Cook, something I want to normalize this season is he is my RB1 for the 2021 fantasy football season. Dalvin Cook has an absolutely monstrous upside here, and I think the player he's in most competition for that RB1 spot right now is Christian McCaffrey for the Carolina Panthers. They're both great options. Both have super high fantasy value, really nice upside, and you get a ton of workload and receiving game incorporation into their offenses as well, which we love to see. But the thing that makes the Dalvin Cook situation all the better for me is what he does in his division and with his schedule. The Vikings have a third-place schedule, and I know the Panthers weren't high finishers in their division either. I believe they also might be on a third-place schedule right now. But Dalvin Cook, on top of that, has the NFC North going to his advantage here. He gets the Packers and the Lions twice a year. Those are two matchups each, so 4 total games that are really, really juicy fantasy situations. I know that both teams have won out there this offseason and invested into their defensive fronts to try and bolster those units, but the Packers, at the end of the day, they deploy Kenny Clark and try and have him eat up 2 blockers at a crack, and then they have edge rushers on the outside, and they really only run 2 or 3 true defensive linemen at a time. Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith, they might walk up to those edge linebacker, or those defensive end edge spots, but they're not there to stop the run. They either rush outside and try to get the quarterback, or they shoot the first gap that opens up and try and make a play. So they're not true run defenders. That gives Dalvin Cook a ton of cutback lanes. If you watched last season, Dalvin Cook literally beat the Packers by himself last year. He dominated that front 7 so bad that they could not stop him as a rusher or a receiver, and he just blew through that entire game. He has that type of potential. He is an elite runner. And obviously the Vikings are a run-first football team as well, so he gets a ton of carries and a lot of volume to work with. He had multiple games last year with 30-plus carries alone, not even factoring in that receiving work. So Dalvin Cook here is an absolute beast. Fantasy football RB1 for me in 2021 here. CMC's closely behind, and he's a very great receiver as well out of the backfield. But he's got the Saints twice a year. He's got Tampa Bay. Those are stingier matchups. Then we're going to be seeing Dalvin Cook playing against Detroit and Green Bay. And obviously there's a ton more games on the schedule. But those are just some things that I've highlighted and that have elevated him just a smidge higher. And you add in the fact, too, I know the Lions have bolstered that run game, but they're only projected like 4 or 5 wins this year. They're not going to go anywhere and win many football games. They'll be trailing. Opposing teams will be running the ball on them. It's not going to be a good situation. So Dalvin Cook, he's my RB1. Moving on here, Saquon Barkley is a player I've been dying to talk about this offseason, and to address a lot of the players out there who are rightfully so very concerned about Saquon Barkley's status right now, his fantasy value, and what that means going into this season. We're going to do a little bit of a Saquon Barkley rant here today, and we're going to talk in depth about what I see happening for him for the 2021 season. So for people that are worried about Barkley and his production levels this season, obviously he's been talked about kind of as an injury-prone back, and that's kind of been the case throughout 2 of his first 3 seasons here, and I get the logic behind it, but Saquon Barkley came off of a clean ACL tear. He's had almost 11 months, and by kickoff, it will be 11 months of rehab and recovery time to strengthen the knee, to come back, to be better than he was before. And that oftentimes is the case for athletes recovering from ACL surgery. And when you look at freaks of nature like Saquon Barkley, you have to expect that he'll come back better. A lot of players aren't focusing on those core knee muscles and those tendon areas when they're doing their strength training. And when you have to rehab and do physical therapy on that stuff, the increase in durability is going to be that much better. Now, he does have a bit of a higher chance of re-injury, obviously, because of the fact that he's already injured it once. But we've seen plenty of players come back and be just fine off ACLs and win comeback player of the year. And that might be something that's in the cards for Barkley here this season. Saquon Barkley is one of maybe 2 or 3 backs in the NFL that is an every down, one-touch score threat. And he might just be the best player in the NFL at that. Maybe a Dalvin Cook is pretty darn good at that as well. You can toss a couple other names in there. Derrick Henry's pretty darn good as well. But literally every single time Saquon Barkley touches the football, he has a chance to go the distance, whether it be 75 yards or more, and ring up a house call for a touchdown. There is no one as explosive in the game right now as Saquon Barkley. This guy was basically the chosen one. He was the messiah of running backs coming into the NFL in the 2018 draft. We've never seen someone this freakishly athletic, this insanely talented and skillful at his position. I mean, I watched Saquon play in 1.5, maybe even 1.25, if I remember correctly, games last year. And just what he does in the open field is flat out terrifying if you're an opposing defender. When he played Pittsburgh week 1 last season, he had virtually no running lanes. And then the one play they got him into space on like a swing pass, he just was the next level higher of every other player out there on the field. So Saquon Barkley, his if you're looking at this from a dynasty lens, if that's why you're here on this video, go out and buy low for Saquon Barkley right now. He will never have a cheaper stock price on the trade market than he does currently in this offseason. He's still a very young and talented back. He hasn't gotten that second contract, and obviously we want to see him do that. But the Giants have done work, and they've made moves to make this offense more dynamic, and they can't stack the box as much against Barkley anymore because you've got your Kadarius Tonys, your Kenny Galladay's, your Sterling Shepards, and your I'm blanking on Darius Slayton here. There's a lot of names in this offense. They've done a lot to help Danny Dimes this season. And so I think Saquon's going to become all but more efficient this year. So I see this completely trending upwards for Saquon Barkley in 2021. I think he's going to slide down draft boards a little bit. And I was hesitant until I really dove into it and broke down the situation and was honest with myself and tried to put the injury risk in the back burner of my mind. Saquon has a great chance this season. He could finish as the RB1. He's probably the closest and most explosive player in his prime right now than we've seen to an Adrian Peterson, the generation before this. So Saquon Barkley, I'm absolutely in on his fantasy stock this season. He's a player I'll be targeting at the top of my boards. And as a guy who is, again, coming off a big injury, a major and a significant injury that will scare away other fantasy managers, you're going to be able to get him at a discounted price, and you can maybe even see him slide to that 5th or 6th draft spot in your fantasy league. So next up here, I've got Jonathan Taylor, another running back who I've heard some hate, and he's gotten some criticism amongst the fantasy community, but I'm here to tell you Jonathan Taylor is going to be a top 10 fantasy back this year. You're drafting him like one on draft day. It's a significant investment, and he's going to pay it back off to you. Jonathan Taylor is a guy who, just like Dalvin Cook, has a super easy division schedule, not many tough opponents. He probably even has a better opposing division schedule than a Dalvin Cook. So rather than those 4 games for Cook that I'm absolutely in love with that don't even factor in the rest of his schedule this year, he gets the Titans, the Texans, and the Jaguars twice a year each. So 6 games that are basically a cakewalk. That's how we saw JT pop off at the end of last season and absolutely scorch opposing teams in fantasy and win a lot of leagues because he was playing his garbage division opponents that can't score points. They're winning from virtually the first quarter onward, and they're just running the football out. The Colts are absolutely just like Minnesota, a run-first football team, and JT is a really, really underrated player in the open field. His straight line speed is excellent, and this is a guy who does not get caught if he's got people in the rear view mirror, He's a very underrated receiver. We saw that part of his game with Phillip Rivers under center, and if the Colts are smart, they're going to use Carson Wentz to get those easy completions to Jonathan Taylor, whether, we're going to see Nyheim Hines sprinkled in there. Marlon Mack's going to see some work as well, but people who are concerned about Marlon Mack coming back into this backfield and stealing a significant amount of touches and workload from Jonathan Taylor are kind of silly. Marlon Mack was never as explosive as Jonathan Taylor. He was never as physically gifted as JT. And as productive and as nice of a RB2 that he once was, the Colts aren't stupid. They know that he has nothing on Jonathan Taylor's game. The upside lies with Jonathan Taylor. We saw Jordan Wilkins last season with JT in the backfield, which tells me we're going to see some Marlon Mack, but it's almost going to replace that old Wilkins rule. And he's probably still around with the team. I should double check on that. But nonetheless, it's just going to shuffle those extra carries down the board here. Maybe JT, honestly, he'll probably see an increase in total touches throughout the year because he didn't really grasp that starting role until the back half of the season. But nonetheless, JT, I expect to see even more carries, even more workload than he did last year. He's going to be a really productive back this season, you guys. I'm thinking probably a top 5 to 7 running back in fantasy this year, and that is an absolute gold mine when you're talking about a position group that is so lacking of top-end talent. This is a player who gives you not only that great floor and consistency that you really need at the position, but he also gives you that elite upside that can win you those games and doesn't limit your overall output as a fantasy team as a whole, which is something that is vitally important for a lot of lineups. And then next up here, Aaron Jones for the Green Bay Packers. This is another player who I think we've seen kind of be hated on the last 2 seasons. He's been going in the 3rd round the last 2 years, and he even slipped into the mid-3rd round for his ADP for the 2021 season after he finished in 2019 as the RB2. So he did see a little bit of a regression, and that was fair and expected because of how many crazy the touchdown count that he had in 2019. But I expect him in 2021 to shift more close to those 2019 numbers than he was in 2020, and here's why. The Green Bay Packers in 2020 deployed a lot more of a balanced backfield set in 2020 than they did in 2019. And what that means is that they were using Jamal Williams on the field as a threat a lot more than they were the season prior. And while Jamal Williams maybe wasn't hogging a ton of workload, he was out there and used as a body on the field a much higher amount of the time. The Packers ran a bit more of a committee-style system. I think their strategy was to go into it trying to keep Aaron Jones clean for the playoffs and really healthy going into the backstretch of the season. And it worked out and it was fine and whatnot, but we saw Aaron Jones absent from entire drives at a time because of how they were using this backfield. Jamal Williams is gone now. He's a Detroit Lion. He's out of the picture. Aaron Jones is going to grasp some more of those carries and workload in that backfield, and he's going to get back some of the volume that he lost and at least be out there on the field and have the potential to catch more passes and see more volume if Aaron Rodgers hopefully is the quarterback and calls an audible and changes the play and whatnot. So they still have A.J. Dillon. They picked him in the 2nd round. He's going to get touches. He's going to be involved in the backfield. I promise you that he is going to be there and he's going to be used, but it won't be to the same extent that Jamal Williams was. The one thing that Jamal Williams could do that A.J. Dillon is not very strong at is the receiving game, and Jamal Williams is very underrated in that phase of his game. A.J. Dillon is not a strong pass catcher. He is a bulldozer. He is going to run defenders over and put his shoulder down. Maybe he snatches some touchdowns away, but we've seen all the same from Jamal Williams in the past. I'm looking at this as Aaron Jones gets more receiving work this season and maybe even sees the percentage of snaps on the field increase from 2020, therefore driving up his fantasy value. And as a running back, you can get in the late end of the 1st round. I really like that value because I think the potential upside is so great, because even though he had a lot of touchdowns in 2019, that receiving volume, that receiving work that he was doing out in space was really great in driving that value upwards. So I love Aaron Jones in 2021 here. Up next, I've got Zeke Elliott, and another player who is a back end of the 1st round, top end of the 2nd round running back player here. This is a guy who I think is falling down fantasy boards, and I see the logic behind it once again. But as I talked about in my Dynasty trade targets video, my buy low candidate was one of them was Ezekiel Elliott here. He got introduced to a part of his game that we had never seen prior to last season, and that was the work he did as a receiving back. And Zeke is not in his prime anymore. We're not going to see the 2016 Zeke that was an absolute dominant player and took the league by storm there. And he's not going to see those 25, 30 touch games anymore. But Zeke's still going to give us 18 to 22 roughly total touches per game. And as a receiving back, he was actually quite effective, and I was very impressed with what I saw from him. He dealt with some injuries. That offensive line got decimated last year and had holes all over it, and was one of the worst units in the league at points last year because they just didn't have competent bodies out there to do the work that they wanted them to. But Zeke's going to come back this year. Dak Prescott hopefully will stay healthy throughout the duration of the season and be available. That's going to keep the Cowboys in a lot more games. They're hopefully not going to be trailing as much. And even when they were last season, they were in shootouts. Zeke had his most productive fantasy games of the season last year. He was catching passes out of the backfield, being used as a check down option, and he was putting up really, really great fantasy numbers. He was like a top 10 back at that point. When Dak went down, the script flipped. He wasn't as productive anymore, and his efficiency as a rusher is down. I will not disclaim that whatsoever. The numbers show his efficiency per rush is going down every season. But what's being added into the game here are those receptions. So if you're playing PPR, all the better. And he's getting run after catch when he catches the football. So a new element has been introduced to Zeke's game here. That's why I like him in 2021. It has nothing to do with his value as a rusher, honestly, because we know he's going to get attempts. We know they're going to try and run the ball with him. But it's that added element of the receiving game, which is what makes him favorable to me here at the late stages of that first round or at the top of the second. Cam Akers up next here. This is a player who I really like to use as an RB2 on my team, if at all possible. But he absolutely has all the world of potential here. Cam Akers could be a top-end RB1 if he stays healthy throughout this season. I have probably 4 or 5 times compared him to Dalvin Cook on the channel here and talked about how when he hits the edge, he's gone. Both former FSU players, these guys have top-end speed once they hit the edge or get off tackle in space here. And Cam Akers has a great situation with the Los Angeles Rams. Akers is a player who can be used as a 3-down back, and we've heard Coach Sean McVay talk about that a bit here this offseason. We saw Malcolm Brown, who started out the season last year as the lead back in this offense, depart in free agency. He's a Miami Dolphin now. He's gone. It's really going to be the Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson show this season. So those guys have both gotten dinged up a bit last year, but if they can stay healthy, I think this is going to be a really productive backfield. I think the Matthew Stafford addition is going to drive the overall ceiling and production potential of this offense upwards because they're going to extend drives, they're going to stay on the field, they're going to move the chains. So Cam Akers, if all goes well, he's probably a top 10 back this year, and as a player that you can get with, he's going around the 13th or 14th pick right now. I'd feel comfortable taking him at the 112 position if you want to go that route, but you can even snatch him up potentially if a team decides to pass on him there at the top of the second round. Then up next here, another second-year running back. This is another common theme here. These guys have super high upsides, and this is essentially the prime for running backs in today's NFL. We see them get used and abused early on in their careers, unfortunately, but that's just kind of the case that we see here. And J.K. Dobbins is no exception. He was used very lightly as a rookie last season. Mark Ingram, Gus Edwards, they all had their functions in that offense. But it's J.K. Dobbins' time now. It's time for him to take over. This is an incredibly explosive player. We've seen him at Ohio State be an absolute phenom in space, and I've watched him as a Wisconsin Badger fan completely take over Big Ten championship games and just run wild on opposing defenses. So J.K. Dobbins is one of my favorite prospects from last year's draft class. I actually talked about going into the draft class. As a Badger fan, I would have taken J.K. Dobbins over Jonathan Taylor and Clyde Edwards-Helaire if I was the Chiefs with that 32nd pick. But regardless, J.K.'s coming in this year. Him and Lamar are going to run that read option offense. They're going to be really, really great at it. The Ravens have reinvested into that offense. They've added some receiving threats, which I think will lighten up the box big time because they had no level of dynamic ability last year. They couldn't throw the ball effectively or consistently. So adding in guys like Tylan Wallace, like Rashad Bateman, and even Sammy Watkins. That's going to be a big deal for this offense, and J.K. Dobbins especially should be able to be a crazy efficient player, and if we see him get some of that touchdown production, he's going to be a big-time player here that you can snatch up at nearly any point in the second round, depending on how your league favors him. So JK, really high upside back here, and I think he's got a pretty safe floor as well, being in a run-first offense like a lot of these guys are. And then Najee Harris here. This is a running back late second round right now. You can, case by case, top of the third, mid-third round. But Najee Harris is going to be a league-winning back next year. I think a lot of people are discounting the fact that he can do some work in the receiving game, and they look at his frame, they look at his height and his weight, and they say he's a power back. He's just going to be a goal line player. No, if you've been looking into the beat writers for Pittsburgh right now and hearing the reports out of camp, this guy's making one-handed catches and making wow-type plays in the receiving game. That's where he's actually excelling right now at training camp. So Najee Harris will be used very much as a dynamic player in this offense, and we've heard the comparisons as soon as he got drafted. Can he be the next Le'Veon Bell? Can he imitate the production of Le'Veon Bell? I think that would be an absolute dream scenario, and we can all hope for that, but I think if we're more realistic, even a discounted value of a Le'Veon Bell in his prime would be insane here for what the prices you're paying for Najee Harris in drafts. I expect him to actually get off to somewhat of a shaky start this season because I've talked about how the Steelers line concerns me. And one of the things that actually increases offensive line productivity is just time playing together with the same unit. When they can have a level of comfortability with each other and chemistry amongst the front five guys, they'll actually start playing better. So I think it might be a rocky first month for Najee Harris. Maybe you don't get around to drafting him on your league's opening day. Go out and trade for him. This is going to be a player who the back half of the season, the last 6, 7, 8 weeks, he's going to come out there and go on a tear. So the Steelers team, they've got a lot to prove this year, and the run game being missing from that 2020 season was a main factor in their total debunking and failure at the end of the season. So they're going to make it a point of emphasis. Mike Tomlin is a smart head coach. They're going to run the football, and Najee Harris is going to see a lot of work in this offense this year. And then Antonio Gibson here. This is a player who's kind of falling down draft boards right now. I think that the injury last season kind of, threw some shade on the Antonio Gibson party that was very much a real deal for the most part of last season. When he got hurt, he was one of the more exciting backs in the league, and he was coming off some super hot-handed performances, really great touchdown numbers, really great production as a receiver and a rusher, and reports are coming out right now that they actually want to use Antonio Gibson more as a receiving threat. So that is great news for me. A back who's going in the mid-third round right now has super high upside right now. I think that Antonio Gibson is one of those really dynamic players. He actually played some wide receiver in college. So I think that coming out here, they don't really have another true running back in Washington. This is kind of a one-man show in this backfield, and with Ryan Fitzpatrick at quarterback, you really never know what's going to happen. But I think the one thing that we can consider as the constant in this offense is Antonio Gibson. So I'm all in on the Antonio Gibson game in 2021 fantasy football. I think he'll come out here. He'll be a really nice PPR threat at the running back position. He can probably even put up RB1 numbers for most of the season. You see he finished as RB13 last year, and he was dealing with some significant, I believe it was a turf toe last year. So a lot of things going for Gibson this year. I think he has another productive season and bounces back from that minor injury he suffered at the end of last year. And then finally here, one high upside name that I think is going to get a lot of, I don't want to say he'll be discounted on draft day, but I think that he's going to be heavily slept on here, is Trey Sermon. He is inevitably going to see the field at some point this season. Raheem Mostert can't stay healthy on the field. He is great when he's out there, don't get me wrong, but it's not dependable to ask Raheem Mostert to play a 17-game season now. And we look at Jeff Wilson Jr., who just got injured. Trey Sermon's a back that you can get, and we'll see where his ADP falls at the end of August, but he's going to be a player that is not going to cost you very much on draft day because of him not being a day one starter. He's going to go in there, and I guarantee at some point he will put up RB1 numbers. Whether it's him just scoring multiple touchdowns per game, because that just seems to be a theme with the 49ers backfield, or if it's Kyle Shanahan giving him 28 carries in one contest and him running for nearly 200 yards because 49er running backs seem to have some sort of magic juice where they just catch an incredibly hot hand at one point. whatever it is, the scheme works. Something is crazy right about this run game there in San Francisco. And Trey Sermon is a pretty darn talented back who can play physical, and he can also play some finesse ball and hurdle over defenders and make guys miss in the open field. So he's a guy with crazy high upside. I'd stash him on my bench and wait for him to break out. It's going to happen at some point this season, and I think that he's going to be a league winner. This is one of my favorite rookies in the 2021 running back class, so you need to get your hands on him if you're given the chance. Alrighty, those are some must-own running backs for 2021 fantasy football. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to head down and click that subscribe button and turn the bell on so you never miss a future episode here on the channel. Also, go check out those social medias in the top left-hand corner of your screen. That's how you get updated about new videos, any new announcements, giveaways, and whatnot that we're doing here on the channel, and other important information related to your fantasy league. So, thank you so much for tuning into today's video. I'll see you all next time. Peace out.